Do you ever feel like that you're outgrowing yourself? Like you're just kind of becoming something else, and the life that it just doesn't fit anymore. Today, we're going to continue our series on the middle, where we find ourselves in the middle of so many things in our lives. And in this episode, we're going to talk about being in the middle of growth. Let's get into it. Welcome back to Soulful Wonderings, the space where we search for meaning in everyday life and honor the lessons that help us grow. I'm Heather and I'm your host. And before we get started, we would love it if you would subscribe to our podcast. And you can also head over to our socials and follow us there. And all of that will be in the show notes. So at the time of this recording, we are actually in early June. And I have June 4th on my mind. The truth is I was planning my social media for the month, and I realized that what I had planned for that day on the 4th, it just, it didn't fit. It just really needed to be something else. And I kind of struggled with that for a minute, trying to figure out, what does this need to be? What does it need to look like? What am I trying to say here? you know, And so there were some conversations, made some changes, some edits, all the things. And eventually this episode, it actually sort of inspired me as to what I wanted to talk about for this episode. It grew very organically. Because see, June 4th would have been my sister's birthday. My older sister, she passed away many years ago, but she remains probably one of the most influential people in my life. The things she taught me, even at, a fairly young age for both of us, it was substantial. It was very impactful. She taught me how to be strong, how to study, how to find the answers, and then how to help others and to share. She was very much a teacher, taught me, and showed me the importance of doing things like that. For the longest time in my life, I don't know that I really realized how much of who I became was shaped by watching her. And after she passed, I learned something about her that she had kept hidden from me. Not really from all of us, I guess. I don't know how much I want to get into that part of her story because it's not my story to tell, and obviously she's not here to tell it. So let's just leave it at she eventually became a teacher at a local university where we're from. But she had chased a creative dream of her own. And like I said, I had no idea about that until after she had passed and someone mentioned it. And I thought, she did that? I had no idea. But it didn't quite work out the way she had hoped. She kind of didn't get the inroads, I think, that she wanted to get. So her life ended up taking a different direction. And the truth is, learning that changed the way I saw her story in particular, but it also kind of changes the way I see mine. Because see, we both did that, right? We both chose more quote unquote corporate careers, the ones that were more acceptable. You know what I mean? Society deems those more appropriate. It's something that's brag worthy for your parents to tell friends and family. When they come and say, oh, what are the girls doing? Now that they've graduated or whatever. And you hear these people tell these stories about their kids, and sometimes I think parents look at it and think, well, little Johnny's in jail. Look, I'm joking. That was bad. But you know what I mean? I think parents sometimes, they want to one up each other, right? They want to be able to be proud of what their child is doing. And it's really sad because I think they probably are proud, but society wants you to be able to say, that your kid has this amazing job making all this money and or been accepted to some Ivy League school or whatever. It's like there's this societal competition, and so I feel like some of us go into these jobs, we make these decisions based on what is acceptable and what's brag worthy. And I think I also look at these were jobs that were more worthy of the sacrifices that our parents had made for our educations and all the things. And you know what? I lived that life for a very long time. And lately I've been really realizing that one of the versions of myself that I'm outgrowing is the version that lived in the shadow of everyone else's expectations. Even when I was in it, though, I never felt like I belonged there. I always felt like I was on the fringe. I was never good enough at it. Do you know what I mean? And that was before this journey that woke me up to all these realizations. So I'm in that place of kind of the middle, right? Again, I think you're always in the middle, but you started that corporate job. I did that, started, and I was in the middle of that. It hadn't ended, haven't retired or anything like that. And now though I'm transitioning, but I'm still trying to feel my way through it, I'm still not sure what it should look like. So again, I feel like that brings us back to that conversation of being in the middle. We live so much of our lives in the middle of transition. Again, is there an end to this? Will I reach a point when I'm done? And maybe in some ways, when you look at kind of general growth and learning, I don't know that we're ever done with that. But maybe we'll reach the end of this fork of the path that we've chosen. That may be true. We may reach that end, but inevitably, it will lead to a new fork, right? A new direction to try to take. And the truth is, we may start down a new growth path for many reasons. That graduating high school. I know we've just had a lot of people do that. We're in that season, and those kids are graduating into kind of they're transitioning into kind of adulthood, right? After college, we had adulting hard after that. Maybe then you get married, and of course that's an adjustment. Maybe later you have kids, and on and on and on. You continue to transition and learn and grow. You learn to be a spouse, a partner. You learn to be a parent. Later, perhaps you learn to be a grandparent. And then there's the other parts that we don't love to talk about, like the breakups or the losses and things like that. Those are moments of growth and transition as well. And as we talked about in the grief episode, that can roll and just compound so easily as we live our lives. And that's just the regular kind of life part, that kind of day-to-day adulting part. The part that you often find yourself just, I don't know, following the crowd and going to the next step. Do y'all remember that? I mean, when you were in high school, that's what everybody talked about. What are you going to do after high school? And I know where I was, so many of those kids that were going to college, that was just the logical next step. But even if you didn't do that, the logical next step was to start finding a job, getting out on your own, all those things. So there's just this path that everyone seems to follow. But in the midst of all that, in the midst of all the adulting and all the kind of normal societal things that we do, we're trying to understand who we are. Are we kind and supportive? Is religion a thing? Is spirituality a thing? Are you like me and you're 30 years in when you and your husband find out that you can talk to dead people? Who knew? But now that's part of our thing. Are we manifestors where we're born leaders? Are we generators where we're people that can just work all day? Do we like doing or planning? Do we like both? Do you get where I'm going here? Who are we? So in the midst of growing up and learning to be responsible citizens, which is how I've heard parents describe it before, we are raising you to be responsible members of society. All right. But we've got to find out the who, the what, the when, the where, the why of ourselves, don't we? Or we're at least trying to. And it's hard to find time to do all of that. while you're lifing. So I find it tends to come in cycles, and that's partly because of time and partly just the evolution of our lives. So as we find ourselves, often we are letting go of those expectations I was talking about. And some of those are from people that we have deep admiration for. Am I right? Deep love for. People who had major influences on our lives. Up to this point of awakening or transition or growth or whatever you want to call it, they probably very much molded who we are. And because think about it, when people are teaching, they often teach what they know, right? What they believe or what they would do. But when we start to figure out who we are, that may change. And look, that's not to say that all that goes away. Most likely it does remain a part of you. It's part of what makes you who you are. You know, no matter what you decide to believe or want to be, that's part of you. It's part of what got you here. Even even if it's in a bad way. I've heard people say they had horrible parents and learned nothing. No, you learn what not to do, right? I had a manager like that once that I learned how to be a good manager by basically doing the opposite of everything they did. Not ideal, I'll grant you, but there is a lesson in everything if we look for it. Okay, maybe I need to digress a little bit on that one. But for me, as I get older, and I believe other people are in the same situation, I find myself asking myself, what do I want? What feels true for me? What am I becoming? And again, it's not that everything from our past is necessarily going to go away. I think we just start to look at what stays, what goes. You know, what stays, what adjust a little bit. Um, so it's not that you, what is the phrase? Throw the baby out with the bathwater. That's not what we're saying here. But we start to evaluate what's mine. What out of all of this is really mine? And what was someone else's belief that I just sort of took on because they were my teacher or they were my influencer? So sometimes we pursue growth, right? Or change. It's something that we look at and say, I would like to really evaluate that. See how I feel about that, work on that. Sometimes, though, growth happens anyway. You know what I mean? It happens whether we want it to or not. You know this, right? Have you ever found it out the hard way? Lord knows I have. I think we all have. And that's the really challenging one. The one that'll hit us like a freight train. Those are so fun, aren't they? The ones that are attached to a moment, you know, maybe an illness, big illness. Y'all know some of the catalysts for me was big old long COVID, you know. That's what really started making some changes for my life because of just how hard that was hitting me. It could be an accident. It could be a loss. Again, y'all have been listening know some of my catalysts, some of my big moments have been from losses that I've had in my life. I know you guys know what I mean. I'm not the only one out there that's gone through that. Then you also have the changes that you're still not necessarily asking for that change, but it starts to come. It may be a little more gentle. Those are the ones that we may not recognize it while it's happening. In fact, with that type of growth, I find that we rarely do recognize it. Heck, it could be that way for a lot of types of growth that you don't really realize what's happening until you're really into it. And okay, I want to know how many people feel this way. How often do you pursue this growth, right? Or at least when I was first starting out in this kind of journey, how often do we imagine this transformation as this, dramatic moment of clarity where everything just suddenly makes sense? Maybe we even glamorize it. It's kind of like one of those glow up montages that you see in movies or on TV. Look, watch some Hallmark for a minute. You'll know what I'm talking about. How many of us kind of think of it that way? Oh, when I go through this moment, it's going to be so wonderful and so amazing. And it's the reality is it's not. Growth is often uncomfortable, you know. But sometimes it often starts with at least something happening that makes you pause and kind of go, huh, what's happening here? Let me take a look at this. And sometimes it is truly subtle. You know, you just start feeling disconnected from things that maybe they once felt right, but now they just feel, I don't know. Activities that you used to really enjoy, just, I don't know, you're just not excited about them anymore. And maybe there's goals that you were working towards that they just, I don't know, they just don't feel quite as meaningful as they did before. Everything's just kind of meh. Okay. Do you know what I mean? You may even begin questioning beliefs at this point, right? Um, Question those expectations that you've carried for years. That's a lot of how it started with me. I just started going, huh. Because part of it was I was hearing other things. I was seeing other things. I was seeing other people doing things that I want to do that. And I would, not jealous, but be like, I want to do that. And then it started making me question. It can truly be unsettling when the old version of you no longer fits into your world, but the new version hasn't fully emerged yet. You know, you're still trying to figure out what that version is. You're still questioning, you're still learning. Guess what? You're in the middle. I don't know about you, but I've experienced that more than once in my lifetime. And there have been seasons when this happens that I just felt something's wrong because I just felt so restless, you know? And you kind of start to assume, okay, well, I just need to work harder, right? I need to push through. I need to find the quote unquote right answer. I need to find alignment or whatever you want to call it. But when you look back, you know, most of those moments, they weren't signs that I was lost. They were simply signs that I was changing. And again, this is something that will happen multiple times in your life. I believe it may overlap. You may have one area of your life that's changing, and while that's happening, something else happens at the same time. Maybe those lessons are connected. Maybe the growth is connected. Maybe they're, what do people always say? They're adjacent to each other. Do you know what I mean? So sometimes it's not even, sometimes that can even complicate it more. Do you know what I mean? Because you feel like you're just getting poured on, that all these things are happening at once, but they may be connected and kind of be taking you the same place. It just got a little gnarly trying to make it happen. So let's talk about some of the common signs that you're outgrowing a version of yourself. One, we said this a second ago, that things just no longer excite you, you know, because sometimes we hold on to these interests or habits or even dreams and goals simply because they've been part of us for so long. You know, they've kind of become part of our identity, but maybe they just stop bringing you joy. And that doesn't necessarily mean that you failed. And I think that's where a lot of us struggle. Well, if I didn't get there, then I failed. That's not necessarily true. It may just mean that you've outgrown that. You've grown beyond that. And so now it's just simply time to change that goal or that dream. The second one we talked about was you're questioning old beliefs. You know, growth often begins with curiosity. You know, you may find yourself asking questions that you've never asked before. Like I said, why do I believe this? Is this truly what I want? Who taught me this? You know, what parts of this do I want to hold on to? All too often, when we begin to question, we're going to discover that our beliefs aren't our own. They were given to us from someone else. And that's fine. Questioning isn't betrayal. Okay? That's a thing I think a lot of people struggle with. You're not betraying anyone by questioning it. It's simply exploration. It's allowing us to find out, what do I believe outside of this influence that I've had? Next is feeling restless. I think restlessness gets a bad reputation, because sometimes it's just simply your inner self recognizing that something needs to shift, right? You're starting to feel uncomfortable. Something doesn't feel right. And hear me, when you start to feel that, that doesn't mean you necessarily have to solve this immediately. I immediately have to have the answer and I need to take action. You find yourself going, all right, I need to make a hard right and get this in order and get this corrected and get the feeling right. No, not always. Sometimes you may just need to listen and start to figure out, why are you restless? Start to process that so that you understand where it's coming from, why you're feeling uncomfortable, and then what move you need to make. Number 4, when approval matters less than authenticity. When we're younger, many of us build our lives around expectations, family expectations, societal expectations, career expectations. And then as we grow, we often begin caring less about fitting in and more about being honest with ourselves. And that can feel both freeing and terrifying. But when it really settles in, when you stop asking for approval from someone else, it is fucking glorious. For me, at that point, I'm believing in me, which means I'm trusting. And if I'm trusting, then I'm trusting Creator and my intuition that's connected to Him to be my guide. And it is fucking glorious. No longer seeking the approval of others, no longer looking for the outside people to tell me that I am good enough or I'm doing it right or any of those things. God is telling me that. God is telling me what I need to know. And that's where it's authentic and it's really me. And number 5, you're not sure what's next. This may be the biggest sign of all. The space between where you've been and who you're becoming is rarely clear, right? It's uncomfortable because we want certainty. How many of us hate the unknown? It's not so much the thing that we're scared of, it's the not knowing. There's just so many damn variables, right? But growth often, it asks us to trust the process before we can see the destination. What's the saying? You must take the first step even when you can't see the entire staircase. That's not exact, but you get me, right? So how many of you are in the space in between? If you're experiencing any of these signs, know that you don't have to have all the answers right now. You don't need a 5-year plan. You don't need to immediately define the next version of yourself. Sometimes the most important thing you can do is just stay curious, right? Allow yourself to explore. Allow yourself to question. Allow yourself to change. Growth doesn't always feel like becoming more. Sometimes it feels like letting go of what no longer fits. And that's okay. We're in the middle, right? Enjoy it. It's really crazy as I was going through this and kind of writing all this out. And it started out with me thinking about my sister. And all I could think is, what? She's probably just enjoying all of this, because here I am going, look at me having this profound realizations. And she's probably all, you're welcome. And of course, me being the little sister I figured it out myself. And of course, did you though? With that smug older sister face. Anyway, I'm sure she's enjoying this realization way too much. Anyway, on to some reflections. So if you'd like to take a minute and kind of reflect on this, because maybe you are in this place, here are some questions you might start with and kind of just get you thinking and get you moving. What feels different in your life right now? Really examine what's going on, what feels different, why are you feeling uncomfortable, Start to identify it. Next, what are you questioning? What types of things? Is it beliefs? What is it? And again, start to identify it. I recommend journaling some of this because you may start to see the patterns. Next, what no longer fits? Are those things in your life where you're kind of meh and you don't really know how they work for you anymore? And what are you curious about exploring next? Again, I recommend journaling on those. Often as you start to really think through, those thoughts will really start to flow and it will really start to become more evident, because you may be a little bit confused about it, trying to process it just in your mind. But once you start writing it down and you see it, again, sometimes you see patterns and you start to see, oh, okay, I see where I'm going here. And then you decide, where do you want to go from here? And my final thought today, sometimes confusion isn't a sign that you're lost. Sometimes it's a sign that you're becoming.